My name is Ryan Murphy, and by the time you hear this, I will probably be dead. That is not a hook. That is a logistical detail. The recorder I am speaking into is the property of New America, and New America does not survive what I am about to do. So if anyone ever plays this back, it will be the thing that crawled in afterward, looking for a clean throat to wear. I am leaving the recording anyway. There ought to be a human voice on the tape when they find it, even if the human is gone. I should start with the snow, because the snow is what we tell ourselves saved us, and the snow is the first thing that lied. 38 years before any of this, a rock the size of a small city came down through the atmosphere and put a hole in the Atlantic that bled steam for a year. The maps you grew up with are wrong now. The shape of every coastline is wrong now. What used to be Florida is a shallow green sea you can wade in if you are stupid enough to want to wade in something that warm. The dust went up and stayed up. Crops failed for 9 growing seasons in a row. Whole continents stopped answering radio. The official count from the surviving councils was around 4 billion in the first year, which is the kind of number that stops meaning anything the moment you say it out loud. I was 3 when it hit. I remember the sky being orange for a long time and my mother singing something I cannot recover. I do not remember her face. I have tried. What was left of the United States military pulled north. There was a base above the Arctic Circle that had been hardened against thermonuclear scenarios and had its own geothermal taps and its own water under the ice. They walked in and they shut the doors and they called it New America and they started over. By the time I was old enough to enlist, they had been running for 32 years on the same generators, the same recycled air, the same 1,400 personnel rotating through the same 1,400 bunks. It was not a country, it was a held breath. I was 23 when the council pulled me out of the salvage corps and sat me down in a room with no windows. There were 2 of them. Counselor Vance did the talking. The other one, a woman I never got a name for, wrote everything down by hand on real paper, which was the first thing that told me this was not a regular conversation. Paper was rationed. Paper was for marriages and death certificates and the occasional treaty with one of the southern remnant tribes. Paper was not for briefings. Vance asked me if I remembered J.D. Dallas. I said of course I remembered J.D. Dallas. He was my closest friend in the salvage corps for 4 years. We pulled copper out of dead cities together. We slept back to back in a Quonset hut in what used to be Edmonton because the heat was bad and the wolves were worse. 6 months before this conversation, J.D. had tested out of salvage and been transferred to a place called Outpost Bradley, which was the elite training installation about 200 kilometers further north. He had written me one letter from Bradley. It was a strange letter. It talked about how proud he was to be selected, and how the food was better, and how the commandant had personally singled him out for the Z program, whatever that was. The handwriting was J.D.'s. The voice in the letter was not. I had read it 3 times, trying to figure out what was wrong and given up. I had not heard from him since. Vance said, J.D. Dallas is missing. He is the 14th elite recruit to disappear from Outpost Bradley in the last 3 years. We have asked Sergeant Bradley directly. Sergeant Bradley says they were promoted to a forward observation post and the records are classified. We have asked for the records. We have not received the records. We need somebody on the inside who is not on Bradley's list of expected arrivals, and we need somebody Bradley has not personally interviewed, and we need somebody we can write off if it goes wrong. You meet all 3 criteria. Will you go? I said yes before he finished the question. The other one looked up from her paper and gave me a very long look. Then she went back to writing. That was the part that should have warned me, the look. She knew something neither of them had said, and neither of them was going to say. I think about that look a lot, even now. I think she was trying to decide whether telling me would have made any difference. I think she decided it would not have. She was probably right. They flew me out the next morning on the regular supply hop. The cover story was clean. I was a routine new recruit, name unchanged, salvage record intact, age and physical right at the line where Bradley liked to skim. The only thing in my bag that was not standard was a small black coin pressed into a slot in the heel of my boot. If I found something the council needed to see, I was to put the coin in the next supply pallet going south. They would understand. If I did not put the coin in a pallet within 60 days, they would understand that too. The flight north took 4 hours. I slept for 2 of them. When I woke up, the loadmaster was standing over me, and the engines had changed pitch, and the windows were full of white. Outpost Bradley sat on a black volcanic spur poking out of the ice shelf like a bad tooth. From the air it looked like nothing. A few low buildings, a comms mast, a landing pad scraped clear by a perpetual katabatic wind. The wind the loadmaster told me was the only weather Bradley had. It blew from the same direction every day of the year, at roughly the same speed, off the polar plateau and down toward the coast. He said it like he was warning me about something. I thought he meant the cold. I should have asked him what else he meant. There were 11 of us on that flight, 10 new recruits and me. The other 10 were younger, 18, 19. The oldest maybe 21, standard intake. They were all good-looking in a particular way, broad shoulders, clear skin, even teeth, the kind of physical specimens you only saw in salvage when somebody had been eating very well for a very long time. 2 girls, 8 boys. The girls were both blonde. One of the boys, a kid named Nick, had a laugh that started in his stomach and made everyone around him want to laugh too, even when nothing was funny. I liked him immediately. I tried not to like him. I had been told, in so many words, that everyone I met at Bradley might be dead within the year, and that included me, and that I should not get attached. I got attached to Nick within about 15 minutes of meeting him. I am not going to pretend otherwise. We landed. The doors opened. The wind came in and took the warmth out of the cabin the way a sponge takes water out of a sink. We walked out into it, and a man was waiting for us at the edge of the pad. Sergeant Bradley. He was not a big man. That was the first thing that surprised me. The stories made him sound enormous. He was maybe 5'11", slim 50s, with a face that had been good-looking once and was still arranged correctly but had something wrong with the eyes. The eyes did not blink at the right times. He watched all 11 of us walk off the ramp, and he did not blink once. When I shook his hand, his palm was warm. I remember being surprised by that. I had been expecting him to be cold. I do not know why. The whole place was cold. He was the only warm thing on the volcanic spur. He said, "Welcome to Bradley. You are going to do things here you did not know you were capable of. Some of you are going to be selected for the Z program. The rest of you will serve your purpose in other ways. Do not ask questions about the Z program. You will know when you are chosen." Then he turned and walked away, and we followed him because there was nowhere else to go. The interior of Bradley was warmer than the outside, which was not saying much. The corridors were narrow and lit by yellow strip lights that hummed. The walls had been painted at some point in the previous decade and had not been touched since. There was a smell, very faint, that I could not place. Not mildew, not unwashed bodies, although there was some of that too. Something underneath. Something like the inside of a hive. I noticed it, and then I stopped noticing it. The way you stop noticing any smell you live in long enough. Which is also a thing I think about now. They put us in a bunk room with 12 beds, 11 of which were assigned to us and one of which was empty. The empty one was at the far end against the wall. The sheets were stripped. The mattress had been turned. I asked the corporal who was showing us around whose bunk that had been, and he said it used to be J.D. Dallas's, but J.D. had been promoted and we should not worry about it. I thanked him, and I unpacked, and I did not look at the empty bunk for the rest of the night, because I was already being watched, and I knew it, and I had only been on the spur for 2 hours. Training started at 5 the next morning. I will not bore you with the details of the training, because the details did not matter. The training was a smokescreen. The training was theater. We ran. We did push-ups in the cold until our hands lost feeling against the concrete, and our knuckles split, and the blood froze before it could drip. We learned to disassemble and reassemble 3 different rifles, 2 of which were pre-impact museum pieces, and 1 of which I'd never seen documented anywhere. We were taught to fight with knives by a man named Corporal Esther, who had been at Bradley for 19 years, and whose face never quite settled on any one expression. He moved like somebody who had been told what a human moved like, and was approximating it from a description. When he demonstrated a disarm on me, he held my wrist for a fraction of a second too long, and his fingers were dry and cool. And in that fraction of a second I felt something underneath the skin of his wrist that did not belong to a wrist. I did not say anything. I went back to my mark. He smiled at me with his lower face. We were given lectures on tactics by Bradley himself, in a freezing classroom with peeling posters of pre-impact military operations on the walls. The lectures were strange. They circled, they doubled back. Bradley would start talking about flanking maneuvers and end up talking about loyalty, about the body's debt to the unit, about how the highest form of service was to allow oneself to be used. He used the word used a lot. He used it the way a normal man would use the word serve. I took notes. I tried to look like the kind of recruit who took notes earnestly. I did not understand what he was saying, and I did not want him to know that I did not understand. Once, in the second week, he called me to the front of the classroom and asked me to explain in my own words what I thought a soldier owed his unit. The other recruits were watching. I had rehearsed an answer for exactly this kind of question on the flight in. I gave the rehearsed answer. Loyalty, sacrifice, discipline, the standard words in the standard order. He listened to me with his head tilted slightly to one side, and when I was done he did not say anything for a long moment, and the silence in the room was the worst silence I had ever stood in. Then he said, "That was a very good answer, Murphy. That was the answer of somebody who has thought about the question. I want you to think about it some more. I want you to come back to me when you have a better answer." He smiled. I went back to my seat. My legs were not entirely steady. I had no idea what a better answer would have looked like, and I was certain he did, and that he had not asked me a question. He had marked me down for later attention, the way a butcher might mark a particular animal on the way past the pen. By the end of the second week, 3 of us had been selected for the Z program. The selection happened in the night, which I think was the point. You went to sleep in your bunk and you woke up in the morning, and the bunk next to you was empty and stripped. The corporal would tell you, at breakfast in a voice you were supposed to envy, "So-and-so has been selected. He will be undergoing training in a separate facility. You will not see him for some time." The other recruits cheered. The other recruits believed. Nick was the third to go. I went to bed on a Thursday, and he was 3 beds down, laughing at something one of the girls had said, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up, his bunk was empty and stripped, and his boots were gone, and his footlocker was gone, and there was no sign he had ever been in that room. I asked the corporal at breakfast. The corporal smiled and said, "Nick has been selected. Congratulations to your bunk. You should be proud." I said I was proud. I ate my breakfast. I went out to morning drill in the wind. When we were running our laps around the perimeter, I let myself fall back to the rear of the formation, and I cried, briefly, into the wool collar of my jacket where no one could see. Then I got my breathing back, and I caught up to the formation, and I did not think about Nick again, because the kind of thinking I would have had to do would have shown on my face. That night I waited until everyone else was asleep, and I got out of my bunk and I went looking. The official map of Outpost Bradley showed a clean rectangle. Main barracks, mess, armory, command, training hall, infirmary, a motor pool you could see from outside. The official map did not show a basement. The official map did not show the elevator at the back of the infirmary supply closet, which had no buttons on the inside, only a slot for a key that I did not have. The official map did not show the third corridor branching off from the laundry, the one that smelled stronger than the rest of the building, the one with a door at the end that was locked with a kind of lock I had never seen before. It was a wet lock. There was no other word for it. The keyhole glistened. I did not try the door. I went back to my bunk, and I lay there until Revel, and I memorized the layout of what I had seen, and I made a decision. The next supply hop was in 11 days. I had 11 days to find proof of what was happening to the Z program recruits, and I had to find it without Bradley finding me, and I had to be alive at the end of the 11th day, and I had to get a small black coin into a pallet bound for the south. If I missed the hop, the next one was 43 days out. I did not think I had 43 days. The smell in the building was getting stronger, and the recruits around me were getting quieter, and I could feel the shape of the thing now, the way you can feel the shape of a wound under a bandage without looking. Something was eating us. Something was eating us slowly enough that no one panicked, and quickly enough that anyone who arrived already counting would notice the count going down. The thing that broke the case open was Jamie. Jamie Presley was one of the 2 girls on my intake flight. She had not been selected for the Z program. She had been assigned to the medical wing as an orderly, which was a non-combat role, and the kind of thing they gave to recruits who tested high on intelligence and low on aggression. I had not paid much attention to her in the first weeks, because I was trying not to pay attention to anyone, but on the 9th night, 2 before the supply hop, she sat down across from me in the mess hall and pushed her tray 6 inches closer to mine and said quietly, without looking up from her food, "I know what you are." I kept eating, she said, the new recruit Murphy. Salvage Corps, 23, older than the others. Did not laugh at the corporal's joke in the briefing room on day 1. Watches the doors. I have been watching the doors for 2 years. I know what you are because I have been trying to be what you are, and I am not very good at it. I need your help, or you need mine. I do not care which way it goes. I asked her what she had seen. She told me. She told me that the infirmary closet elevator went down, not up. She told me there was a level below the outpost, dug into the volcanic rock, that did not appear on any document she had ever signed. She told me she had been ordered to deliver fluid samples to a sealed door on that level twice in the last 6 months, and that the orderly who had been doing the deliveries before her had been the third Z program selection of the previous year, and that no one acknowledged he had ever existed. She told me that the fluid samples she carried were not human. They were thick and clear and slightly warm, and they smelled like the corridor outside the laundry. She told me she had run a chromatograph on a Alaslin sample, using equipment in the infirmary that no one ever audited, and that the results had been unlike anything in the medical database. She told me there were proteins in the sample she could not identify. She told me one of the proteins was reproducing inside the sample tube while she watched. She told me she did not think Sergeant Bridley was the one in charge. She thought he reported to something further down. I asked her how she knew that. She said because she had seen him talk to it. She said it was on the second delivery. She had been late. The sealed door had opened a fraction earlier than expected, just a fraction. Long enough for her to hear Bradley's voice on the other side, saying yes ma'am, yes ma'am, yes ma'am, 3 times in a row, in a tone she had never heard from him in 2 years of taking orders from him. The voice that answered him, she said, was not a voice. It was a sound that her ears interpreted as a voice because they did not have any other category for it. She said the sound made her teeth hurt. She said she had wet herself on the elevator ride back up, and had not told anyone because she did not want to be selected. I asked her how I could get down there. She said she could get me there. Once. She had the codes for 1 cycle of the elevator. She had stolen them off the chief orderly's terminal when he had a stroke 6 weeks ago, and the infirmary went into emergency triage, and nobody was looking. She could send me down on the next delivery run. She could not send me back up. Whatever I found down there, I would have to find another way to the surface, and I would have to do it before the security sweep at 0400, or the bulkheads would seal and I would be down there with whatever it was when the next round of selection started. I asked her why she trusted me. She said she did not trust me. She just needed someone to go down there who was not her, and I was the only candidate she had. We agreed I would go the next night. I will tell you what I saw down there, and I will tell you what happened, and I will tell you what we did, and I will try to keep the order of it straight. But I want to warn you that some of this I am putting together after the fact. Some of it I lost time during. Some of it I think my brain has refused to let me have back, and I will not pretend I have it. I am giving you what I can. The elevator went down for a long time. Longer than the volcanic spur was tall. They had dug under the spur. They had dug under the ice shelf. By the end of the descent, I think I was below sea level, in a chamber cut into ancient bedrock that should not have been accessible to anyone with the equipment New America had. Something had dug this place out before us. Something had dug it a long time ago. I counted the seconds on the way down. I had a habit, from salvage, of counting in elevators and counting in vehicles, because counting was a thing my brain could do when nothing else useful was available to it. I counted to 142 before the elevator stopped, at a meter per second, which was a generous estimate for this kind of cable, that put me almost 150 meters below the surface. Then I remembered the elevator had been accelerating for most of the descent, not coasting, and I revised the number upward, and then I stopped revising because the number was not actionable and was just another way of being afraid. The doors opened into a corridor that was warm. That was the first wrong thing. Everything else at Bradley was cold. The barracks were cold. The mess was cold. The infirmary was cold. The corridor below the infirmary was warm, the way a body is warm, and humid, and the walls were not metal or rock, but something that flexed when I put my hand on it. The walls had a give to them, like a thick callus over softer tissue. When I pressed harder, I could feel the softer tissue underneath the callus, and I took my hand away and I did not put it back. The smell was the smell from the laundry corridor, multiplied by 1,000. It was the smell of inside a thing. I was in the gut of something. I understood this immediately, in the way you understand certain things before you have words for them, and I almost got back in the elevator. I did not. I had told Jamie I would not. I am not sure that was the right call. I am sure it was the call I made. I walked. The floor was uneven in a way that suggested it had not been laid by hand. It rose and fell with the slow regularity of something that had grown rather than been built. The phosphorescence in the walls came on as I approached and faded as I passed, which meant that something in the walls knew I was there, and was responding to me, and was not alarmed by me yet. That was the part that kept me walking. The walls were not yet alarmed. The thing at the end of the corridor had not yet been told a stranger was coming. I had a window. I did not know how long the window was. There were chambers off the main corridor, open arches in the wet wall. I made myself look into them because that was what I was there for. In the first chamber I found beds, rows of them. On the beds were the recruits, or what had been the recruits. Nick was in the third bed in the second row. I want to describe what had been done to him, and I find I cannot. I will say this. He was alive. His chest moved, his eyes were open. There was a thing coming out of the base of his skull and going into the wall behind him. And the wall was breathing, and so was he, and the rhythm was the same. There were 14 beds in that room. The other rooms I will not describe. There were 6 rooms. In the last room there was the thing in charge. I do not have language for it. I am going to try, and you are going to have to fill in the gaps, because human language is not designed to describe what I saw, and the more accurately I describe it, the less you are going to understand. It was large. It was the size of a small house. It was not one creature exactly. It was many creatures, or it was one creature that had decided to look like many, or it was something that did not know the difference. It had eyes. The eyes were arranged in a way that suggested it had not always had eyes and was still figuring out where they went. It had a sound. The sound was not a voice. Jamie had been right about that. It was a sound my ears interpreted as a voice because they had no other category. It was speaking to itself, or to me, or to nothing. In the moment I walked in, and when I came through the arch it stopped. It looked at me. I want to tell you that I felt fear, and I did, but the fear was a smaller thing than what else I felt. What else I felt was understanding. The thing was not malicious. The thing was hungry, and the thing was old. And the thing was very far from home, and the thing had found a small warm place full of useful creatures, and the thing was farming us. The same way we used to farm cattle, without hatred, without joy, without anything I would have recognized as a feeling. We were the local protein. It was using us. It would use us until there were no more of us, and then it would die slowly, because it could not make any more of itself without us. And then the wind would blow over the bones of Bradley for a few centuries, and that would be the end of New America. And the thing would not have noticed it had killed us any more than we noticed when we ate a chicken. That was the worst part, the indifference. I would rather it had hated us. I would rather it had wanted to hurt us. The fact that it did not want anything from us except our usefulness, the fact that we were a resource and nothing more, was the part that broke something in me that I do not think has been put back since. It made the sound again. The sound went into my teeth. I understood what the sound was. It was asking me a question. It was asking me whether I was a useful one or a contaminated one. It was asking because it could not tell. It had been farming Bradley for years, and it had gotten good at reading us, but I was new, and I had walked in through the wrong door, and it did not know what category to put me in. I said, "I am a useful one." I do not know what my voice sounded like when I said it. I do not know if it understood the words or the intent behind them. I do know that it considered me for what felt like a long time, and then it looked away, dismissed me, and went back to whatever it had been doing before I walked in, which was something to the wall, something I did not look at, something I am not going to describe. I walked back through the chamber. I want to be honest about the next part. The honest part is that I almost left Nick. I almost left all of them. I told myself that I could not carry 14 people up the elevator. I told myself that the mission was to get evidence to the council, that I was one man, that the smart play was to get out and come back with help. I told myself all the things you tell yourself in that situation, and they were all true. And I was about to go back to the elevator when Nick opened his mouth. He said my name. He said it quietly. He said it with the bored, surprised tone of somebody who has just remembered a word he had been trying to remember for a long time. Ryan. He said Ryan, and his eyes did not move, and his chest kept the slow rhythm of the wall behind him, and I understood that some part of Nick was still in there, and that the rest of him knew it, and that he had been trying to say my name for weeks. There was no plan after that. There was no calculation. There was only the next thing I did, which was that I pulled the thing out of the back of his skull. It came out wet. He convulsed once, and then his eyes focused, and he looked at me, and he said, "How long?" I told him. He nodded. He could not move his legs. He looked down at them and tried to make them work, and they did not, and he looked back up at me. And the look on his face was not despair. It was a kind of professional curiosity, as if his legs were a problem he was going to have to solve later, after the more urgent problems were done. That look was the most Nick thing I had ever seen Nick do. It was the laugh that started in his stomach, transposed into a different key. It was the proof that he was still in there. I have held on to that look ever since. I held on to it then. It got me through the next 10 minutes. I pulled the rest of the beds. I do not know what I was thinking. I pulled all 14 in that room, and then I went into the other rooms and I pulled the rest. And most of them died as I pulled them, because they had been integrated longer than Nick, and there was nothing of them left to come back. But 4 of them, including Nick, were still themselves enough to know me when they came out. 4 out of, I think, 40. The math of that is something I think about. The math of that is what tells me the thing had been at Bradley a lot longer than 3 years. The council's count of 14 missing was wrong. The count was much higher. The count went back to the beginning. The thing in the last chamber realized what I was doing before I was halfway through. It made the sound again, louder. The walls of the chambers began to flex. The smell got worse. The lights, which had not been lights but some kind of phosphorescence in the wet walls, began to dim and brighten irregularly, like an irritated pulse. I knew I had a small number of minutes. I gathered Nick and the 3 others I could move, 2 men and a woman whose name I never learned, and I dragged them to the elevator. Nick could walk a little by then. The woman could not. I carried her in a fireman's hold, and Nick carried one of the men, and the other man walked on his own with one hand on the wall, and we went to the elevator, and I hit the button, and we went up. The elevator did not come up to the infirmary. The elevator came up to the surface. I do not know if Jamie did that, or if the elevator did it on its own when it sensed something was wrong below, or if I have been wrong about the floor plan of Outpost Bradley the whole time. The doors opened, and we were in a side maintenance shed at the edge of the landing pad, and the wind was coming off the polar plateau, and the cold hit us, and the cold was a clean, honest cold, and I have never been so glad to be cold in my entire life. Then Sergeant Bradley walked in. He was alone. He was not armed. He was smiling in the way he smiled in the lectures, which was not really a smile, which was a thing his face did because he had been observed doing it and had learned to do it back. He looked at the 4 of us, and at me, and at the elevator behind us with its doors still open, and he said quietly, "Oh, Murphy! Murphy, that is a shame. I shot him. I had a sidearm. It had been in my locker for weeks, standard issue, never inspected by anyone who cared. I had stuck it in my belt before I went down with Jamie, and forgotten I had it until I saw him. I shot him twice in the chest and once in the head, and he fell down, and there was no ceremony to it, and no speech. I had spent 11 days afraid of him, and he was a man, and he died like a man, and that was the worst possible thing he could have done, because for a moment I was angry with him for being so easy to kill, as if he had wasted my fear. I was not thinking clearly. I am not pretending I was. I shot him, and I felt nothing about it for about 3 seconds, and then I felt everything about it, and then I shoved the feeling down because there was no time." Nick said, "The radio." I knew what he meant. The comm shack was 40 meters across the pad in the wind. The council needed to know. The council needed to know now, before the thing below dug itself out, before it figured out it could simply come up through the volcanic rock if it wanted to. The supply hop was in 2 days. There would not be a supply hop. There would not be a Bradley by the time the next supply hop arrived. Somebody had to broadcast. I left Nick and the others in the shed and I ran. The wind tried to kill me on the way. It pushed and it pulled, and it took the heat out of my lungs, and it tried to put me on my back. I kept my feet because I had to. I reached the shack. I broke the door because I did not have the code. I sat down at the long-range set, which I had been trained on in salvage, because salvage was always rigging long-range sets out of dead cities, and I sent the message in the clear because I did not have time for encryption. The message was 16 words. I am putting it on this recording now because I want it on this recording. It said, "This is Murphy at Bradley. There is an alien parasite under the outpost. Burn this place from orbit." I sent it 3 times. The 3rd time the receiver came back with 1 word from the council, transmitted in the clear, with no call sign and no formality. The word was, "Confirmed." Then I went back to the shed. We had 2 days. I want to tell you what we did in those 2 days, because what we did in those 2 days is the only part of this story I am proud of, and I have not been proud of very much. I will be brief, because I am running out of time and the recorder will eventually click off. There were 1,400 personnel at Outpost Bradley. 40 of them, by my best estimate, were down below in some stage of being eaten. Some unknown number more, including Bradley himself, had been compromised in subtler ways. The senior officers, the chief orderly, the corporal who had been at Bradley 19 years, maybe more. There was no way to test for it. There was no way to know who was useful, in the thing's terms, and who was contaminated. Jamie had figured out one rough test. She could draw blood and look at it under a field microscope. If the cells moved correctly, they were probably human. If the cells did something else, they were probably not. The test was not perfect. The test got us most of the way there. We told everybody. That was the move. There was no clever plan, no elaborate trick, no secret weapon. We told everybody. I got on the base intercom from the comm shack, and I told the entire outpost what was under their feet. I told them about the chambers and the beds. I told them about Bradley. I told them about the thing in the last room. I told them I had killed Bradley, and I told them why. I told them the council was going to burn the outpost in less than 48 hours, and they had two choices. They could stay and die and let New America survive, or they could fight with me and clean the rot out of Bradley with their own hands, and then walk south on foot across the ice in the hope that the relief column the council was going to send would find them before they froze. I told them I did not know if anybody would survive walking south. I told them I did not even know if the relief column would come. I told them I was going to fight either way, and that everybody who was still themselves enough to make a choice was welcome to fight with me, and that everybody who could not make the choice would die down there with the thing. And I was sorry about that, and I meant it. I expected nothing. I expected honestly to be ignored. I expected to be shot by my own side. I had been standing in front of the microphone for less than a minute, and I was already running the rest of the speech back in my head, and finding all the places it had been wrong, all the words I should have chosen differently, all the appeals to fear or pride or hatred I had not made, because I had been too tired and too cold to think of them. I was apologizing to nobody in particular when the first knock came at the comm shack door. It was Corporal Howes from the motor pool. He had not been on the intake flight. He had been at Bradley for 7 years. He was the kind of man who never spoke at meals and never volunteered for anything, and who I had assumed, without thinking about it, was a lifer who would do whatever the chain of command told him to do. He stood in the doorway of the shack with snow on his shoulders, and he said, very quietly, "My brother went into the Z program in year 2. "Tell me where to go," I told him. He went. After Howes the rest came in a flood. I do not have a clean memory of that hour. I have flashes. Mehal Sargent, who was a woman of about 60 who had cooked our breakfasts every morning for the entire intake, walking into the shack with a butcher's cleaver in her hand and asking me if I needed her down in the corridors. 2 of the medical orderlies whose names I never learned, carrying a stretcher of medical supplies, because they thought we would need to evacuate wounded. A pair of junior recruits from the intake before mine who had clearly been crying, and who told me they had wondered for months why their friends kept being selected and never coming back. A man with one arm whose other arm I learned later he had lost in the previous year, in a training accident at Bradley that I now suspect was not an accident. A teenager who had been born on the spur and had never lived anywhere else. A chaplain. A baker. The man who had repaired the radios when they broke. 840 of them came. I did not know that was the number when it was happening. Jamie counted afterward. 840 out of 1,400. The rest were either compromised or scared or both. We fought them. We fought our own. We did it in the corridors of Bradley with rifles and knives, and in one case a length of pipe somebody pulled out of a wall. We fought them in the mess hall, and the laundry, and the training hall, and the infirmary, and when we had killed everybody who failed Jamie's blood test, we went down. The fighting was the worst thing I have ever done. I want to be clear about that, because I have told you about the chambers and about the thing in the last room, and you might think those were the worst things. They were not. The worst thing was Corporal Esther, who came at me in the training hall with the same dry, cool hands I had felt on my wrist in the second week, and who had to be put down with 3 shots to the chest and 1 to the head, the same as Bradley, because that was the cocktail that worked on whatever they had been turned into. The worst thing was the chief orderly, who Jamie herself had to handle, because none of the rest of us could bring ourselves to do it, and Jamie had been waiting 6 weeks to do it, and was the only one of us who could go into the infirmary clear-eyed. The worst thing was the senior officers in the command room, who had locked themselves in and who had to be burned out, and who walked out of the smoke, not screaming because they could not scream anymore, and who we shot in the doorway one after another like a line at a soup kitchen, and who I will see when I close my eyes for the rest of my life. We did it anyway. We did it because the alternative was to be food, and we had decided with no consultation and no vote that we were done being food. I led. Nick came with me, and the woman I had carried out of the chamber, whose name was Hallie and Jimmy, and about 30 others who had volunteered for the descent. We took every incendiary in the armory. We took every flare. We took the contents of the welding shop, which was substantial. We went down in the elevator in shifts, because the elevator was not built for 30, and we did not say anything on the way down, except to confirm we all knew the plan. The plan was simple. The thing did not know fire. The thing was warm and wet and old, and had been farming us in a sealed dark, and had never been exposed to anything it could not absorb. We were going to teach it. I will not give you the details of what happened in the chambers. Some of the 30 did not come back up. Hallie did not come back up. She insisted on going into the last chamber first, because she had been in those chambers longer than any of us, and she said she had earned it. She walked in 2 incendiaries strapped to her chest and a third in her hand, and she set them off, and I do not know if the thing understood what she had done before she did it, but I know that it understood after. The sound it made when she set off the charges was not a voice. It was not anything that could pretend to be a voice. It was the sound of something that had never been hurt before being hurt, and the sound went into all of our teeth, and 3 of our number went down screaming and clutching their heads and did not get back up. The rest of us went into the chamber after her, and we finished it. I am not going to tell you what we did in there. I am not going to tell you, because some of you would not believe it and some of you would, and the ones who would believe it do not need me to describe it. I will say that we did not leave anything. I will say we worked for 40 minutes. I will say that when we came out of the chamber, the walls of the corridor had stopped flexing, and the phosphorescence had gone out, and the smell underneath the smell, was gone. The thing was dead. Everything it had grown was dead with it. The chambers were just rooms now, dug into rock by something that no longer existed. We went up. There were 812 of us by the time we got to the surface. We had lost 28 in the chambers. We had lost more on the way down. The ones who had been carrying compromised pathogens we did not catch with Jamie's test, and who collapsed in the elevator on the way back up, and who we left there because there was no time. 812 of us walked out onto the landing pad. The wind was still blowing off the polar plateau in the same direction, at the same speed it had been blowing for 38 years. The sky was the kind of pale gray that meant a storm was a few hours out. We started south on foot. The council burned Outpost Bradley 6 hours after we left. They used a kinetic weapon they had been saving for what they called a final emergency. I had not known they had such a thing. Apparently they had been holding one in reserve since before I was born. It came down in a streak you could see from 20 kilometers out, and it hit the volcanic spur, and the spur went away. There is no spur there now. There is a shallow round bay where the spur used to be, and the ice is filled in around the bay, and from the air it looks like nothing. The walk south took 11 days. We walked in 3 columns. Jamie ran the medical column in the middle. Nick and I led the front column. A man whose name I never properly caught, a maintenance chief from the heating plant, ran the rear, and he was the one who decided which of the wounded we left and which of them we carried. That was a job nobody had volunteered for, and he had taken because somebody had to, and he made the calls without flinching, and I have never asked him how he sleeps. We rotated point every 2 hours because the wind off the polar plateau made the lead position a slow death, and we had 900 lives to spend carefully. We ate the rations we had stripped out of the Bradley mess on the way out. We melted snow on a propane stove that one of the engineers had jury-rigged out of a salvage burner. On the 4th day, the storm I had seen building when we left came down on us, and we lost 41 people in a single night, and on the morning of the 5th day we counted ourselves and kept walking, because the counting was not going to put them back. 658 of us made it. The cold took most of the rest. 2 were shot by a southern remnant tribe that did not believe our story about being from Bradley until we had buried our dead, and shown the leader Jamie's microscope and the slide she had carried with her in a wooden box wrapped in 3 layers of cloth. After that the tribe fed us and let us sleep in their long lodge and sent runners to the council to confirm we were coming. We were debriefed for a long time, months. The council wanted to know everything. They wanted to know what the thing was, where it had come from, how long it had been there, whether there were more. None of us could answer any of those questions in a way that satisfied them. I told Counselor Vance I thought it had been there longer than we had. I told him I thought it had been waiting under the rock when the first New America survey team picked the spur as a defensible position, and that the team had walked right into it without knowing, and that it had begun farming us almost immediately, and that the 38 years of Bradley had been 38 years of being eaten by something we had built a base on top of. I told him I did not know if there were others. I told him the thing had felt very alone to me. I told him I did not have any way to verify that feeling. Vance asked me whether I thought we had won. I said, "It depends on what you mean by won." He said, "We killed the thing." I said, "Yes." He said, "We saved the human race." I said, "Probably." He said, "That sounds like winning to me." I said, "I do not know how to explain to you why it does not feel like winning. I will try. I will say this. We were food. For 38 years we were food and we did not know it, and the species that had been farming us did not hate us, did not even particularly notice us, and was indifferent to whether we lived or died, except as that affected the yield. We were livestock that had figured out the latch on the gate. The reason it does not feel like winning is that we have to live the rest of our lives knowing we were food, and knowing that something out there might decide we are food again, and that we will not be able to tell when it has started, the way we could not tell at Bradley. We thought Bradley was a base. We thought Bradley was a refuge. Bradley was a feedlot. I have to live with that, he said. Most people will not have to know about the feedlot. I said, that is your call, he said. It is. Thank you, Murphy. You are dismissed. I have not been to a council briefing since. That was a year ago. Most of the 812 survivors of Bradley have been quietly distributed across New America's other installations, and most of us have signed papers committing us never to speak of what happened, and most of us have kept to those papers. Jamie is at a research outpost in what used to be British Columbia. Nick is at a perimeter station near the old Great Lakes. I write to them when the post allows. Nick retreats back in his own voice, which I have learned to recognize again, which I had to learn to recognize because for a long time I would read his letters and check the handwriting against an old one of JD's and look for the wrongness. There is no wrongness in Nick's letters. He is himself. Whatever the thing took out of him grew back or grew over or stayed gone, and he built around the hole. I do not know which. I do not ask. The reason I am recording this is that something has been wrong for the past 3 weeks at the salvage station I am stationed at. The smell in the laundry corridor is too strong. 2 recruits have been quietly transferred to a forward observation post that I am not certain exists. The commanding officer's eyes do not blink at the right times. I have been keeping notes. I have been running Jamie's blood test on everybody I can get a sample from. The test has come back wrong on 6 of them. I have sent word to the council. I have not received a reply. I am going to go down to the basement of this station in the morning. There is an elevator behind a supply closet that should not be here. There is a corridor that smells the way the corridor at Bradley smelled. There is something at the end of that corridor that I am going to have to look at. I do not know what I will find. I do know what I will do about it, whatever it is. I know that because I have done it before. I know that because we are very stubborn and we are very stupid, and we are very hard to kill, and we are very bad at being eaten quietly. The thing under Bradley did not know that about us. It had been farming us for 38 years, and it still did not know that about us. It learned at the end, but it could not pass that lesson along, because we did not give it a chance to. If there are more of these things out there, and if they were watching the one under Bradley, and if they saw what we did to it, then they know now. They know about us. They know that the warm, wet little protein source on the 3rd rock from the sun is not as quiet as the rest of the menu. They know we will come up the elevator. They know we will bring fire. They know we will tell everybody. That is what I want on the tape. That is the part I want them to find. We are coming up the elevator. We are bringing fire. We are telling everybody. My name is Ryan Murphy. I was on the supply hop to Outpost Bradley 38 years after the impact, and I went down into the dark under it, and I did not stay down there. And if there is another one of you under the floor of this station in the morning, I am not going to stay down there either. I want you to know that before I come down. I want you to have heard a human voice once, in case you have not. I want you to know what is coming. Recorder off.